Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday evening session of the 2021 NOFA Summer Conference. My name is Paul, and I will be the host for this evening's workshop. And by the way, you are at the presentation for the NOFA Mass Soil Technical Team. Before we begin, I just have a few announcements to go over. Once again, I'm sure hopefully everyone has been enjoying the summer conference and welcome to all of our participants. If we had been in person at Hampshire College this past weekend, we would have had a great time and met new people and connected with old friends, but the conference would be over. And what would we be doing tonight? Who knows? We are here again with our virtual conference, and one of the positive aspects of having our conference virtually this year is we're able to continue our learning throughout the evenings this week. So thank you for joining us throughout the conference. We will, of course, keep our fingers crossed that we can all meet at our individual state conferences in person this coming winter. So let's hope for that. We are presenting, attending, and hosting this workshop from land that was inhabited before European colonization. Please take a moment to honor those whose land you now occupy. Much of what we know about how to grow food and manage land regeneratively came from farmers of color. NOFA invites you to consider how to incorporate racial equity in your own work. We have a little bit of Zoom etiquette for you in case you aren't up on your Zoom etiquette yet. We will have lines muted when you join, and we ask you to keep your line muted until you have a question, and then you can unmute yourself and ask your question. If there is excessive noise, we have the ability to mute you if necessary. Please do use the chat feature for questions. Our speakers have asked that we hold any questions until the end of the workshop. But as the workshop goes on, if you think of something and have a question, feel free to put that question in the chat, and then we'll address them at the appropriate time. Also, the chat can be saved. If you click on the three dots to the right of the chat box, and you can select Save Chat. And so then you can save all the notes and comments and everything that's in the chat. And note that this session is being recorded, and you will have access to it as soon as we're able to post it online after the workshop. I want to take a quick minute to thank our sponsors. The summer conference would not be possible with the help of our many generous sponsors. Many of them have been supporting NOFA's conference work for years and years, and we appreciate them. And I'm happy to say we have some new sponsors this year as well. So I'm sure someone here has a need for something that our sponsors are offering. So when you need to do your shopping for your home, garden, or your farm, we hope you give consideration to the businesses that support NOFA in our work. Just a quick reminder about the online auction. Many of our sponsors have donated a number of neat things, and particularly relevant for tonight's workshop, there is a soil microscopy package available on the auction. Super cool, so check it out. If you're not into that, you could get some oysters. Or some coffee or fish emulsion. So everything that a person needs. And finally, we have a virtual vendor marketplace. So please check out your program book. There's videos to our vendors, lots of ways to interact with them. So I want to give a shout out to them for their support. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the Soil Health Technical Team. And I'm going to start with Laura Davis. Laura Davis is our board president. She has a couple different titles. I know she helps with our farmers that are going through organic certification. So she helps them through the certification process. She also helps with our soil technical team. And just just a quick note that this entire soil health team that NOFA has is really a new and exciting development for NOFA over the past few years. 3 years ago, I don't know if any of these positions existed with NOFA, but now when we look at the size and the team that we have put together to help support our work in soil health, it's really incredible. And I'm excited to hear from each of them tonight. So Laura Davis, let's hear what you got.
Thank you, Paul, and welcome everybody. And I'm really excited to spotlight our soil technical team. We love to talk about soil and microbes and soil fertility and organic matter and all things soil. So we got a pretty nerdy group here, and we want to share that with you and all of the services that we can offer to you in your garden and on your farm. And as Paul mentioned, we started our technical service group at NOFA Mass with organic certification assistance back in 2014. And around 2017, Julie Rawson and I were talking, wouldn't it be great for people to be able to send in their soil test and get a recommendation for soil amendments? And so we began that process back in 2017, really got off the ground in 2018. And last year, we did a record over 100 soil tests that we analyzed last year for you gardeners and farmers. So we're really excited this year to talk about some of our newer services that we are envisioning and some new soil nerds that have joined the team. So strap yourself in. We're going to talk a lot about those services so that you know where you can get assistance once you need it. So I'm going to share my presentation here, and so you can see it. Oops, I better go back. Hang on a second. Let me start from the beginning instead of the end. That would be good. Okay, I think we're set now. And just to start off, I wanted to break out the services that we offer in terms of current services that we offer and future services that we are developing at this moment. So stay tuned for those as well. We currently take in soil tests from various labs and analyze them for you and give amendment recommendations. So that's been a big popular program, especially this past year. And we also have something called a soil health test. These are physical type of tests that that can be done on your soil either by yourself or by one of our technicians. That was formerly known as the carbon proxy test. We also do a lot of soil health workshops, and we also do many soil health presentations. We also have a gardener help listserv that is staffed by many of the people on our soil tech team, as well as many, 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 many other gardeners and farmers in the NOFA world. Some of the future services that we are envisioning, number one is soil biological analysis, and you're going to hear more about that. Soil remediation for those soils that may have been contaminated, and also organic farm advisors to help aspiring farmers with various challenges on their new farm. So when we think about the key pillars to healthy soil, food, and humans, there's really three parts. And these three parts are the physical part of soil, biological, and then chemical. And we want to make sure that we are offering services that reflect all three areas. The physical, you'll hear more about in the soil health test. The biological, you'll hear more about in the biological analysis. And the chemical really is all about your soil test and what minerals your soil test is showing that you have. So these are our current services. How do you access these current services? Well, we're going to make it easier for you to access these services, and we will soon, hopefully in the next month, have an electronic form on our website that you can actually fill out to check the available services that you are interested in, whether it be a soil test or a presentation that you would like us to make. It will enable you to upload your soil test or to upload photographs, and it will also enable you to pay for those services or ask for a quote for those services. So first, I would like to introduce Anna Gilbert-Muhammad, who is has many roles at NOFA Mass. She is our equity director as well as our food access coordinator, and she also does soil technical advising. So Anna, I'd like you to come off mute and tell us a little bit about what you work on.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Laura. Laura wears many hats as well, so I'm just trying to follow in her footsteps there. But I usually, but most of my work, I start at the basic, if you will. I'm based in Springfield, Massachusetts, which has become Tuckland. And a lot of my work is really based around what's happening in our urban centers. As I live in Springfield, I face the same thing that many folks face. And so some of the work that I do and services that I can provide is soil testing assistance. And that includes actually showing you how to take a proper soil sample. A lot of people just say, oh, you know, I just dig up some soil. But there's a particular way to do it. And based on what tests we're using, we want to make sure that we get the best possible sample so we can get the best possible result. Right now, the two tests that I mainly work with is UMass test. It gives the basic soil analysis. We use that particularly to look at our lead levels to see what we're dealing with in terms of lead. And if we need to do a secondary test from UMass, they have a heavy metal test. Now, in my realm, if you are a community garden, a brand new community garden, if you're a backyard gardener and you have a site and you're trying to figure out, can we work with it? I will actually sit down with you over the phone virtually. If you're in my neighborhood, come take a visit. And I will ask you a few questions around, do you know any of the history of the site? Usually in a place like a Boston or a Worcester or, you know, Springfield, Hartford, Connecticut, there's some history. There may have been some structures there before, and they always leave something. History always leaves something behind. And so oftentimes that assistance, that analysis will begin with, do you know the history of the site? Do you know what was there prior to? Because that may give us a snapshot into what we might expect. And then lastly, we do a lot of classes. All of the technical soil team does classes, but I do quite a few on beginning soil analysis. So normally it could be for a group, whether it's a library, whether it's a school, a garden group. We will go over the basics from, like I said, how to take a soil sample, how to read both the Logan Labs test and the UMass test. And you'll see samples of those later on in Laura's presentation. How to deal with amendments, how to do a soil recommendation or what it would look like from us. And then we do something called what is happening under our feet. These are simple, I like to call them soil hacks to achieve maximum soil fertility. And trying to develop that citizen scientist, some people may become, oh my God, I don't know all this chemistry, I don't know all the science. We keep it real simple in this class, and we will tie in what's available to you that you may have already at home that can help you achieve greater soil fertility, what you can purchase on the bulk order. So we do refer to the bulk order a lot, or what's available to you in your neighborhood. So if it's not bulk order time and you want to start right away, there may be some things that you can get a hold of right away. And lastly, there are consultations that we do over the phone, I do over the phone, or I may pay a visit. And it will, you know, it's not just limited to one visit. We will do a pricing for multiple visits and multiple classes. So again, my realm of expertise or areas usually around community gardens, backyard gardens. I do work statewide. And if you're in the neighboring states of Providence, I see my dear sister, Sister Robin, walaikum salam, from Providence, Rhode Island, or if you're from Hartford, Connecticut, I can also work with you there and then tie you into those state NOFA chapters that have technical assistance as well. So that's it for me, and I'll give it back to Laura.
Thank you, Anna. That's wonderful. We'll probably have more questions for you here as we move on. And so next, I just want to say that I myself also do soil technical advising. And although you can send me a UMass soil test, I tend to prefer the Logan Lab soil test results. We'll analyze those and make recommendations for amendments. The amendments will always be organic approved products that we recommend, and they may most likely be on the NOFA bulk order. But as Anna mentioned, if it's not that time of year for the bulk order, we can help you with sourcing the amendments that we're recommending. I'm going to show you an example of that recommendation so that you can see what it looks like, but it will include things like cover crop and calendar recommendations. This is actually what a Logan Lab soil report looks like, and this is in particular my farm soil tests. I send in 5 soil tests every year, so each of these soil samples would need a different analysis, 5 analysis for this particular soil report. And the thing I like, if you do go to UMass, you want to make sure to ask them for an organic matter percentage. It's not in the basic test. They charge additional $6 for it, but it's well worth it. It tells you a lot of good information by having that. But either a Logan Labs or a UMass soil test is fine. And the analysis that comes back looks a little bit like this. I know this is busy, but there's a lot of information here. And what I try to do in this assistance is to really call out the important items that are either deficient or in excess, because many soils have excess phosphorus. This particular farm, which I took their name out, but you can see phosphorus, we're looking for a desired value of 150 parts per acre, and we have much higher levels. So I would recommend to this farm, to cease using any manure on their fields so that they can start to bring that phosphorus down. But these are all comments that I would make about the soil. I would identify how much you would need in pounds. I would ask you what size your growing area is so that I can give you the exact recommendation and do those calculations for you. The other thing that I have been doing is recommending to people to think about not just the chemistry, which is what a soil test does, but to think about the biology, which is the microbes in your soil, and protecting them and growing them, either by growing cover crops or by adding good bacteria and mycorrhiza fungi to your soils. So that would all be in the recommendation. And very often the recommendation goes over to a second page. And I have been incorporating foliar sprays for those people that are interested in doing foliar spraying. So there could be dry as well as liquid amendments. I also try to figure out if you have anything left in your shed or your barn that you want to use up that I could use in the soil technical assistance recommendation. So that's what the deliverable would be for you if you sent in a soil test. Okay. We'd like to combine that process with the bulk order. And so if you get your soil test done by Logan Labs between September and November, you send in the soil test to NOFA Mass. You can identify the size of your growing area. Do you have any existing amendments on hand, and list any plant or soil challenges that you might have. You'll receive that recommendation, and though the amendments will be the exact items that are on the bulk order, and when that opens in January, you'll be ready to place your order because you'll have your list of stuff that you need and the exact amounts. And for using our soil test analysis, you'll get a coupon to take off your bulk order of $10. The pickup for the bulk order happens in mid-March, but this is all a seasonal process, as many of you know that are growing in your backyard. And next, I'd like to introduce Jane Hammer, another soil health tech. And Jane has been with NOFA a couple years, but Jane, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. And I've been working doing soil health. I'm calling it soil health assessment. When I was just starting, we called it soil carbon proxy testing, which you may have noticed on our website. And I was working with Kara Roselle, who really got this off the ground. And this involves coming to your farm or your garden and doing assessment right there in the field. So it's a little more hands-on and gives you a window into how your soil is functioning right there. And then I'll just give you a little overview. We can also do a soil health workshop at your farm or garden, or a soil health presentation, which would be, without being out in the field. It would be more just like in a room or something for your garden club in the off season, or your institution, or just a neighborhood group, or whoever. So you can spread around the education and spread around the cost of us coming there. Okay, next slide. So what do we do? I forgot to mention, I live in Eastern Mass, and I work with a couple others that will also do this testing, who I'll introduce at the end. But so when I say we, it's because there's a few of us that do this, depending on where you're located in the state. So again, this is assessing, sort of going beyond what might show up in a lab test, and looking at what the soil biology and your plants and all the different biological forces and physical situation is on your farm. So what you would do is you would give us an idea of maybe your management issues, any sort of crop issues, questions, and then we look at your site and sort of determine where we would want to test. And then we run this series of tests, which I've listed here are the current tests that we do, and I'll explain a little bit more about each one of those. But the basic idea is that we're looking at how well your soil is going to negotiate water, negotiate root growth, how alive and interactive the soil microbial community is with the plants that are growing there, with the animals that you have. There's a whole workforce down there. And so what we're doing is looking, we're creating a window into that. And we typically come out once a year to do that. Sometimes people can go every 3 years, or you can compare a site, one site to another, based on maybe comparing management styles. Can you advance the slide? So as I was saying, why would you want to do this? Well, obviously to understand your soil better. So you can troubleshoot if you're having sort of chemistry or mineral issues. Sometimes it has to do with the mineral bank that's in the soil, but it also might have something to do with some of the physical or biological situation that's happening there. Because as I'm sure that you've learned elsewhere, the soil life is constantly in negotiation, or is sort of dancing with the plant roots and giving the plants what they need. And if your soil, if there's evidence in your soil that the soil life is building structure and sort of building the topsoil down and allowing the root growth, if there's a lot happening there, then you know that the soil biology can help, rebalance things, even if they're a little off on the soil, on the lab tests. So again, why would you do this? You might compare different management areas. You might troubleshoot some crop issues. We mainly do it for monitoring your farm over time. So even though we're taking data that's comparable from one farm to another, we're mainly comparing, or that's the general gist, is that you're watching your management improve the soil over time, or catching problems and knowing how to troubleshoot them. But we also have some grant programs, which I didn't mention on the slide, where groups of farms are employing this kind of soil assessment and some related soil assessment to learn things together. And then we also are part of sort of a larger regional group that can compare, groups of data together. But this is primarily looking at change over time, or how you're comparing different sites on your farm or garden. Okay, next slide. So some of the reasons that we're looking and doing these tests is it's a direct indicator of what's going to happen when we get that dumping rain, what's going to happen when there's an extended period of very little rainfall. How well is your soil sponge functioning? How deep is your soil sponge functioning? Is there a compaction layer? Is there aggregation? The aggregation is the soil microbes building their homes. So we look at sort of the range of aggregation and the depth of the aggregation, how strong it is, what shape it is, etc. And how well can the roots how well can the soil microbes move, and macro invertebrates move in the soil. Diversity above ground is something we look at, because that can signal diversity below ground. Diversity below ground creates many different kinds of homes, which creates that spongy material, which then translates into your soil's better use of water and nutrients. And as you would guess, your whole farm or garden would be much more resilient with that in place. You'll have healthier crops and higher quality food. Can you advance? So as I said, we used to call it the soil carbon proxy test, and that's because looking at these physical characteristics of your soil is telling us, it's giving us a window into how the soil biology, including your plants and your animals, if you have a livestock above ground as well, how well they are building carbon in the soil. And that includes their own bodies, that includes dead bodies, that includes poop, that includes structure forming glues, all the root exudates, the roots, aggregates, and more. So that's what we mean by soil carbon proxy, is by looking at the physical characteristics of the soil, as well as sort of the color of the soil and things like that. We can tell, is soil carbon building over time? Okay, next slide. So again, I prefer to call it soil health assessment, because we're not, even though carbon is implicit in all of this, we're looking at how well is your soil going to function? this year, and how well is your management helping over time. So again, we do all of these different tests. You can advance the next slide. More specifics, we take the time to dig a hole and measure the topsoil depth, how deep the roots go, how well they're branching. Is there a compaction layer? Is there any point where the roots really can't grow into there? How many earthworms? Are they making channels? Is the soil surface crusting, or is it absorbing water well? And then also the aggregate quality and prevalence. Next slide. So in this picture, you can see there's a gradation. This is sort of a lower level, 8 to 12 inches down, where the soil has gotten a little more blocky, is not as well aggregated. And then to the upper left of the slide picture, it's more of that chocolate cake crumbly look, where the that was within the range of the prominent roots, and they're obviously creating this more fine granular aggregate structure. So that's kind of some of the things we look at when we dig the hole. Next slide. We also do a quick water infiltration test, which tests how quickly an inch of water goes down. A slate test, which tests how much the aggregates fall apart when they're suddenly wetted, which is what would happen in a rainfall. If the aggregates fall apart, then they're not strongly glued together, and they can disintegrate, and then the pore spaces in the soil can get filled up and then block infiltration during a heavy rain. And they also wouldn't act as much like a sponge. So that's called the slate test. That's a newer one that we're doing now. Okay, next slide. So the last three, bulk density, active carbon test, and microbiometer, are ones that are a little more time consuming. I've listed which ones are easy to do on your own with probably pretty cheap equipment, or just things that you have around. The soil hardness I hadn't mentioned yet. We do that with a special tool, but that can also be gauged with just some implements around the farm or garden, like a post or anything sort of narrow and sharp. Next slide. So again, sort of the three ways that we can do the soil health assessment with you is one of our technicians or myself. I can show up at your farm or garden. You can discuss the management, what you're interested in, what you're curious about. We decide on a site, set it up, and then you go off and do whatever else you're doing, and I just do the whole series of tests. And then I write up a report, and that involves some analysis. I don't consider myself an advisor, but we're working on it. And I also bring it some questions I can bring back to the whole team. We can put a lot of minds to what some of the questions are, and or I can come to your farm and do all that, but you can sit in on some of the tests and learn how to do them for yourself. And then we also have the soil carbon grower on-site test protocol booklet that's available for free, downloadable. You can print your own on our website. I think it's under soil carbon resources, but that's the link, which we can put at the end of the chat as well. And then another option, if you want to click the next slide, is we do a soil health presentation, in which we can teach a little bit of the DIY and talk about soil health in general. Or we can do an actual on-farm workshop where we do the soil health assessment that same day, show some of the tests that we're doing, and teach people how to do those, and then also talk about some broader soil health concerns. And we've done it where Laura and I will do the workshop together. So Laura will do the the soil test analysis for your farm if you're hosting the workshop, and I'll go through the soil health carbon proxy assessment at the same time. So next slide. So currently, without the online form, you can just contact us directly if you would like to explore one of these options. So hosting a soil health on-site workshop or presentation, or just getting your soil health assessed and getting that report. And I'll take any questions at the end of all this. So Ruben, I'll hand it off to Ruben. I think he's next. He's one of the people that would come out and do the soil health assessment, but he's got a little more in-depth biological end of things that he'll talk about.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
And Ruben I'm going to introduce Ruben Parilla next, and he is going to talk about one of our future services, which we will call soil biological assessment. Ruben?
Thank you, Laura, Jane, and Anna. This was a great presentation and actually a good way to lay down foundation for what I'm actually about to speak as well. And so before we get into the details of the testing, we will be offering in the near future, I wanted to share some information about what to look for in the analysis and why should we care about this. So this slide here, I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with, is the basics of the soil food web. This essentially gives us the different trophic levels of the soil food web. However, for the purposes of the future testing that we will be conducting, we're going to be focusing on the second through the fourth trophic level on this chart here. And moving from left to right from the second one, we actually have our decomposers, mutualists, pathogens, parasites, and root feeders. So this group is very interesting because it composes of a large variety of organisms, as described in the slide here. It's also responsible for building soil aggregation, as Jane actually has described prior. And this is actually done by two of these organisms. One is the fungi, the other is the bacteria. The bacteria is in charge of creating micro aggregates, while the fungi is actually responsible for creating macro aggregates in our soil. And again, these also are responsible for nutrient cycling, water transport, carbon sequestration, and at the proper balance, some of these also inhibit pathogens and disease as well. Again, this group in particular, the bacteria and fungi are the driving organisms of the soil food web. And obviously behind the photosynthesizers, which are the plants, which if we don't have plants, we don't have the diverse organisms underneath the soil. So next we have the third trophic level here. They're composed of shredders, predators, and grazers. These essentially consume the second level of the trophic level, meaning that they consume bacteria and fungi. They also help to control these other populations and also responsible for nutrient cycling. As Jane mentioned before, this is actually also considered the poop loop. These organisms have more carbon to nitrogen ratio, so therefore they have an excess of nitrogen every time they consume another organism, leaving all this other excess of nitrogen in the soil. So that's which makes it plant available or into a plant available form. Then finally, the last one that we would be touching upon here for the soil food web analysis is the 4th trophic level, which are the higher level predators. Again, if you follow the same logic here, these are also responsible for the same actions of consuming the 3rd trophic level, and also in charge of some of this nutrient cycling as well. And now that we have now that we went through these briefly, and some of the functions, we can perhaps actually we can go to the next slide. So this is a good resource here from NRCS, and I'll drop a link into the chat actually. This is an abbreviated table. However, the link in the chat will give you a better or the complete table, if you will. And they describe in good detail actually which functions for each group of organisms. Let's see. So I think we can move to the next. So now that we went through a brief overview, we describe a few functions. Let's take a bit closer look at what we would actually see under the scope, and we'll go over some identifying features and a little bit of how these are actually treated at the lab. So starting from the upper right or upper left corner, this is a microscopic image of fungal hyphae. And as you can see, there's also some primordia forming, and the primordia are essentially just the fruiting bodies of the fungal hyphae. These are actually measured by length, and also we use other distinctive features like septa, if there's any crystals forming on these, and the width as well. Width is very important in identifying the good fungi versus the bad fungi. The next image here, we actually to the right of that one, we actually have not very clearly there, but you can see 2 ciliates. These are the 2nd level or 3rd trophic level of the soil food web, and these are actually some of the consumers of bacteria. And one of the cool things that I've actually was able to witness was during one of the talks, a farmer actually had mentioned that she actually was using her microscope and determined that she found ciliates in her soil. So she immediately knew from some of the information that had been gathered that, okay, well, I have ciliates, no wonder, my soil went aerobic. So the presence of these ciliates actually provide you with an indication that your soil is actually going anaerobic, sorry. And the conditions are of low oxygen. So these organisms will show up in those types of conditions. And so the next image, the one below that, to the right, those are actually nematodes. There's some juvenile nematodes and adults there too. So these are actually all in different functional groups, all the way from, bacterial feeders, fungal feeders, root feeders, predators, and omnivores as well. They all have different functions. And one of the things that we do in the lab is actually identify the function and provide a count for these as well. The last slide doesn't really look like much, but those are actually bacteria. If we were to look closer at those, there's actually a good variety of bacteria on that image. And that's one of the things that we're looking for. When we do an assessment, we actually look at bacteria counts to provide you with a biomass index for this organism. And what the other thing that we look for is a variety. We not only are we counting, but we're also saying, okay, we have this amount and we observe these types of morphology, meaning we saw bacilli, we saw cocobacilli, we saw all the different features that we would see in morphology in these bacteria, because these are also very important. As you know, variety is a great thing for microorganisms. And so, let's see. So now that we've discussed these organisms and identified a few of these under the scope, and talked a little bit about the functionality, there's also a great resource that I put on the chat there for the functionality of these organisms. I would like to talk about the why. Why is it important? Why are we doing this? And the simple answer to this is balance. When the soil food web is balanced at all trophic levels, in proper numbers, the system is self-regulating. Another aspect to understand about the soil food web is that the number of organisms in the system should be predicated upon the crop you're cultivating. This is considered the plant succession. So at each level of plant succession requires a certain fungal to bacterial biomass. It also requires a certain number of predators at each succession, and each with characteristics of soil structure, soluble nitrogen, and compaction. So these are all the things that should be considered when we're doing this type of analysis. It depends on what crop do you want to grow, and depending on that crop that you want to grow, you want to have a certain biomass and a certain number of these microorganisms. And so how do we do this, right? So the biological assessment is performed by a direct shadowing microscope. You're using a compound microscope, and this method is considered perhaps the least destructive out of all the analyses for biological assessments. And it's also very inexpensive when compared to, let's say, a DNA analysis, which could be somewhat cost prohibitive. And what do you get in our report? For this report, the results are reported as an organism biomass, as I explained earlier, along with the statistical evaluation. And with that, I mean that you'll get a mean of the organisms along with the standard deviation so that you can understand the precision of what we're doing. And what can we analyze? So not only could we analyze your soil, but other media that we can actually analyze are compost, vermicompost. We can look at compost teas and extracts too, because if somebody's actually looking for a foliar application or a soil drench, you want to make sure that you actually have the proper biology before you attach this to this. Not all compost is good compost. And so you have to be careful what kind of compost you're using. So analyzing your compost before it even goes onto your soil is probably a good way to start the addition of some certain amendments. However, adding organic matter is still a good thing. So finally here, our vision at NOFA is to essentially see this testing or to see the microscope be a part of a farmer's toolbox. The same way a shovel is in their shed, we would like to see the same thing with a microscope. We would also like to provide you with some basic training and some education to those that are interested in this. And this, I think, could be an excellent tool for everyone. And as I explained before, we're already seeing some farmers look at these at microorganisms, and it's not as intimidating as it may sound. The microscope should just be another tool that we can continue to utilize. And I think that's all I have for now. And I will pass this back to
Thank
Laura.
you, Ruben. So we're really, really excited about the biological assessment. NOFA for many, many years has been involved with helping farmers think about remineralizing their soil and making sure that they have the right mineral balance in their soil. but if any of you have, listened to John Kempf, who's a visionary in our world, biology definitely supersedes chemistry. So once the right chemistry's there, you can grow a great crop without the chemistry if you have great biology, but you can't grow a great crop with the chemistry with no biology. So this is an additional tool that we are really excited about offering to our farms and gardeners. So stay tuned for how we're going to roll that out over the next few months. So thank you, Ruben. And Andrew was not able to join us tonight, but I'm going to, Andrew's working on a grant currently, and I'm going to have Anna come back and talk a little bit about what that project is and how that might help us in the soil tech team in the future.
Sure. Thank you once again, Laura. So Andrew Lorian, he's my colleague and partner working with me. He heads up our bioremediation program. It is sponsored through MDAR, the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources. We have a grant from them for 3 years, and we are in our 2nd year. And so I'm going to use Sister Robin's question as a basis for some of this explanation, because one of the reasons why we put this grant together and made this grant request is that there are a lot of places in places like, Worcester and Boston and Providence, Hartford, Springfield, where we have a lot of soil contamination, and it may be very difficult to grow in ground. And so then we have to turn to more expensive situations. Like in Boston, a lot of people will remove soil, bring soil in, or new topsoil. I had a neighbor here, a friend of mine here in Springfield. She did that, and it was very expensive. She had to remove that soil, bring in more soil. Or you may have to employ the services of an engineer. It can get very costly, particularly in communities of color, where we are looking to take control of our own food sources. And so this particular project was geared for 2 areas. First, it was with Worcester. Now both of the sites are in Springfield. And we want to engage citizen scientists, if you will, focusing on our youth. So the program and the grant was focused and developed to include our youth. So we are on the sites of Gardening the Community, which is a youth development, food justice, urban farm here in the city of Springfield, in the Mason Square area. That's predominantly Black and brown. And then we are working on the site at Home City Housing at the Franklin Street site, which is part of the Liberty Apartments. And so we're looking at different holistic ways of removing toxins from the soil that may not be as expensive, that will build up healthier soil, that will remove heavy metals, break them down, particularly when you're dealing with hydrocarbons, and then being able to remove those plants and so forth to non-food producing areas, particularly where you may have some heavy metals that are located in those that have proper disposal of those plant partners. And so we are employing some different methods to see, we're experimenting with these methods to see what they will give us in terms of soil remediation. So one is mushrooms. One of our consultants, Willie Crosby from Fungi Ally, has used mushrooms in many instances as a form of remediation. So we've laid down mushrooms on both sites. We'll come back and test later to see their effectiveness. And the youth were trained in how to grow their own mushrooms, growing certain cover crops that can take in those toxins, adding layers of compost and wood chips. We're working with a wonderful consultant, Nancy Clem, she has done work throughout the US, particularly in areas like Chicago. She's based in the area not far from Chicago, in Los Angeles, Oakland, and even in parts of South America. So she's walking us through these different procedures, using some plant ferments like comfrey ferment. In the workshop that Marco Thomas did on indigenous microorganisms, he said, embrace the funk. And so the youth have learned to ferment do some of these ferments and get used to the funk. They may not have embraced it yet, but at least they're starting to get used to it, and we apply that. We will also be employing other testing methods, such as tissue plant testing. So taking parts of the plant, we'll be doing that later this season, sending it in to see how the plants are doing, what they're taking in, can it be traced? And then following back up with another soil test. We are working with another consultant whose testing deals specifically with heavy metals, with toxins and so forth. And so that we're in the second year of this grant. We're looking forward to what the third year will give us and this year, but it's a holistic approach because these lots are really in places that are mostly Black and brown. So we also want to talk about the history. If you remember in my opening words, we use the history of the lot as a way to move into the soil testing. And so we are creating an oral history that will match that, where we talk to elders in the community that surround those lots. We talk to families that may have lived there for a while, other community activists in the area that can talk about, well, what was on that lot before? What was happening in the community? So it's not just the soil science, which is very important. It's not just the soil reports that are very important, but we also get a snapshot into what people were going through at that time. And so Andrew has been leading on youth. He comes out once a week on both sites. We've done the soil health test that Jane just referred to and went through so diligently. And we have some of our youth, we call them youth agricultural scientists, that actually can perform those tests. So we're talking about the water infiltration test, the slake test. We work with the compaction test, the ribbon test, all those they're able to do and also show folks as well. So we're very excited to see what this year will give us and what next year will give us. And to give you a bigger kind of an introduction to how we got started, I'm going to add a link to a YouTube video. This is the online event that we did last year that features Ibrahim Ali. At the time, he was with Guardian Community, Andrew Lorian. You get to hear from some of the youth leaders themselves to talk about how the first year went, how they feel about it. And so all this goes into this approach. So it's the science, it's the history, and it's the people, and it's that holistic approach to soil remediation.
Great, thank you, Anna. We'll look forward to seeing some of those results. That's great. And lastly, Organic Farm Advisors is a future service that we are considering. It currently is offered at NOFA Rhode Island. So if you are in Rhode Island, you can take advantage of the Organic Farm Advisors there now. We are seeking a grant assistance to pay advisors and implement a program whereby we would have various people, various experienced farmers that have specific experience, for example, transitioning to no-till, or setting up your organic certification, or any specific types of I know that I am participating in this program as an advisor in Rhode Island, and I've visited 2 farms in Rhode Island, one to assist with organic certification and one to assist with setting up permanent beds and cover cropping for their first year in farming. So we're looking at this, and we're going to be recruiting experienced farmers to be advisors, and we hope to be able to offer this service to our members in the future. So just to sort of summarize, and then we'll take some questions from everybody. Our current services, soil test analysis and amendment recommendations is currently for our members $25. The soil health assessment is $40, and all of the other services really vary depending upon what you're looking for in terms of workshops, presentations. Our gardeners listserv is absolutely free, and I would encourage everybody to subscribe to that. It's a great service that many of us here are monitoring, but it's also many gardeners throughout the state that can give you advice about what they do as well. And the future services, the soil biological analysis, soil remediation, and organic farm advisors will be coming sometime soon. And I also wanted to mention our NOFA 7 state chapters that also have additional technical services in a little bit different form, depending upon which state you're looking at. But they are, some of their farmer services are listed here. And I want to just highlight at the bottom, the NOFA Mass technical assistance page and the online gardeners forum that you can sign up for. The link is there as well. So with that, we have plenty of time for any questions that people might have.
Great. Well, thanks to each of you for elaborating a little bit more on your respective work, and very enlightening. We have a couple questions. We'll just get right to the chat. All right. So Anna touched on this, and I don't know if we had a complete answer, or Sister Robin Muhammad, if you didn't get a complete answer, we'll read this. If you have more than one or two of these things wrong, can you still repair your soil so that it's safe for food production? And I apologize, I don't know exactly what we were referencing in regard to those items that may or may not be right with the soil.
Maybe she can come off mute and go into a little bit more depth.
Yes. Good evening, everyone.
Welcome.
Oh, okay. Yes, the issues that I was talking about in the very beginning, I believe it was Sister Anna made mention of different minerals that you should have in your soil for a healthy growing. And my question was, if your soil, I probably should have worded it a little differently. If your soil was deprived of more than one or two of those different minerals, or iron, like iron, calcium, or whatever maybe you need for that particular crop, is there any way to repair that crop or build it back up so you can produce the crop that you want?
Definitely, there is. Laura, can you put that slide up that has the soil recommendation, what that looks like? So one of the things that, and I'm working with someone currently now in Springfield, we took us a lot that nothing had been grown on, and it was in poor condition. And we did an initial test. I sent it off to Logan Labs. It came back, and I went over the test with this family and actually worked up a soil recommendation, very much like the one that Laura's going to put up. And we went over both the test and the recommendation that I developed from it, and we worked out a plan. And it was very much based around the NOFA bulk order, so that they knew what to order. So oftentimes, Sister Robin, when we do that test, send it off to Logan Labs and it comes back, we will sit with you and go over, we'll develop that recommendation and go over it with you, so you can see where there may be some deficiencies, how it can be corrected, what you can use. And if you look at this report, and this is very much the report I would send you, you see the different nutrients, what the actual values are, and then the recommendation for any kind of adjustments, with comments as to how to do that further down. That's what you would receive from me or from Laura. And then we go over it with you in terms of the best way, where to purchase these items. So if it's not in the season of the bulk order, then I develop a resource list that I can give you, where you can pick up these different minerals. So there is a way to correct for that. That's what we do with the soil test and then the subsequent soil recommendation. And then Paul, if I can beg your indulgence, someone had asked about when do you take soil test. I'm gonna let, how many times you should do it. I'm gonna weigh in, and Laura, you may want to weigh in on this. Once a year is good, but if you're trying to make an adjustment, sometimes it's good to do it in the beginning of the season and then see how things went and take another one towards the end. Our consultant for the bioremediation grant, she suggested, and this is something I see that does work, doing it once every 3 years. So I'll add to that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, I would say that once you have a baseline, you don't need to take it every year. You know, you can do it every 2 or 3 years for sure. Most farms take it every year, or maybe they do certain fields 1 year and another field the next year. Some gardeners do it that way too. If they have 4 different raised beds, they might do a test on one year and another the other year. So it just depends upon your situation.
Hey, Anna, it occurred to me listening to your presentation that if the soil could talk, it would be so much easier to know the history of that site.
You're right. And that's why doing some of that research on a new site is very helpful, because if it could talk, it'll tell you a story, particularly in our urban areas. But doing that research, you'd be surprised what you'll find in the richness. And sometimes people who lived in the neighborhoods, they could tell you, oh, there was a dry cleaners there. There was a gas station. There was a store. There was this, there was that. And that will also let you know what you can do ahead of time, because sometimes we found during the pandemic, with the labs being closed, we couldn't really do a traditional test. So first question I would ask, well, do you know what was there? And that would tell me sometimes maybe we should just go to raised beds, wait to see what happens with the pandemic, then we can take a proper test.
That's just a valuable process, and I imagine the just bringing people together to talk and share and think about the history of that community has its own benefits aside from just the soil. So I appreciated you sharing that. There's another question in the chat. Is there a point where the soil is too contaminated? And for any of you, have you had soil tests where your advice was to try somewhere else?
Well, yes, I think that's the main reason why the UMass soil test is important, because it's going to give you a lead measurement. University of Maine does that also, and they give you a legend that says for this number to this number, you don't have anything to worry about. For this number to this number, you need to make sure to wash your produce before anything is eaten. And for this measurement and to this measurement, they might recommend not growing in the soil at all. I know in the city of Boston, they do require, no matter what the soil is, that they require a liner, and then new non-native soil or loam and compost are brought in to fill that garden area. So lead's not something to mess around with particularly. I mean, there are other heavy metals, but lead's one of the ones that can really harm us, and especially children.
And with that UMass test too, what's helpful, they will tell you where you have exceeded for a home gardener. And that's where we will discuss with them, okay, there's some other options, like with the Mason Square Library, that test came back, it was very elevated. So we developed raised beds that had 4 levels of a shield, if you will, between that soil we tested and what they were going to grow in. And I went back recently and did a test just to see how things were going. And the levels were low. Everything was good. And in fact, the fertility of the soil, because of how those gardeners take care of those boxes, was through the roof.
Right.
Sister Dora, would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Yes, sir.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much. Sister Anna, if we get a test back, just like the blood test we get for our bodies, and if it's too much cholesterol, I'm just going to use a blood test pertaining to health. If it's too much cholesterol, then we're giving something to lower that cholesterol, right? If you have high cholesterol. If you have high blood pressure, you're giving something to lower your blood pressure. So with the soil testing, if it's too much carbon, and everything else is good, if it's too much carbon, what can we do to lower that carbon? Because it may be the soil test overall may be good. However, there's too much carbon and not enough of something else. So how do we balance that in the community garden? Or if the test say it's too much carbon, we just don't use that community garden at all?
Well, that's a great question. If there's too much of anything, and I love the way that you related to the human body. So if you have too much of one thing, you have to make adjustments. You have to do some kind of remedy for the body. It's the same thing for the soil. So that's where the soil test works with the soil recommendation. Laura mentioned Logan Labs. You probably saw the sample of the Logan Labs test and then the recommendation that was developed from that. That's what we would do in this case for a community garden, for a backyard garden. If that Logan Labs test comes back and we have some high amounts of anything, calcium, magnesium, if there's anything off, then we develop that recommendation. We talk with you about it to bring it back into balance. So what you're talking about with the body, you got to bring that back into balance. We have to bring the soil back into balance. And with the recommendation with the soil test, then we go through how to calculate for adding something, taking away something. We might tell you to add more compost, take some compost away. I had a test recently where we, after we reviewed it and we did the recommendation, I told them, no more cow manure for a while. Let's see how it goes using maybe feather meal. So those are things that we go over. That's what the test will show. And then we do calculations to show you how to bring that back into balance and go over that recommendation with you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. And thanks for taking my question.
That's a good question.
Great. And, I think a lot of these, similar to the body is that, these treatments, amendments, don't necessarily work overnight, but, it can be a long-term process where a recommendation might be to add a little bit of this, 1 year, but maybe you're going to do it for 3 years before you're going to see the end result you're looking for. But, the team will give steps to take at each step, along the way of how to gradually adjust things.
I wondered if Laura wanted to reference something we started to talk about, which is investigating some of the biological or tissue sampling and things like that, where you get a better read on not just the minerals that are in the soil but what is actually available for the plants to use. So you can have an excess of something, but it may not be, just flooding the plant. There's issues with water solubility as well, but there's different things that can be done with the biology of the soil to correct imbalances as well. And some of that can be pretty quick.
Yeah, and so we can also do different types of soil tests. If there's a particular problem that someone's having, the saturated paste test, it kind of gives us a window of what's happening, how much is available of the nutrients within your checking account, whereas a regular soil test is how much is available in your savings account. And that can sometimes help. And if we see a problem that needs to be corrected quickly, that we can't spend years on trying to correct, foliar spraying minerals and micronutrients can actually jumpstart that quicker. So for example, if you did a leaf test, they take a leaf of a plant, they get the sap out of it, that goes through a lab test. They can tell us what minerals that plant has absorbed. Now, it may be that that plant has very little calcium in it, but your soil test says you have lots of calcium in it. That would be a great example of where we could use liquid calcium as a foliar spray on the plant to correct in season that particular problem. So those are some sorts of things you could do to fix a problem, especially if it's a major problem. You're not going to have any tomatoes, for example. That would be hard.
And Laura, something you and I do quite a bit is we will put the nitrogen also that's on there. And I find that to be a big help because there's a chart that we work from that says how much nitrogen you need for each type of crop. Right.
That's right. And most organic growers don't often think they need nitrogen. But if you have a very low organic matter percentage, which we'll show on your soil test, if you have a very low organic matter percentage, less than 5, you need supplemental nitrogen. And so, a alfalfa meal or a feather meal, soybean meal, any of those nitrogen sources can be very helpful to you if you have low organic matter, and Mother Nature's not going to supply all your nitrogen.
Great, thanks. Sister Dora, feel free, please.
Yes, I apologize for asking all these questions.
No apology.
Okay, so I at one time I was working at the South Boston Health Clinic, right? And they had a brand new parking lot. I don't know how long it's been there, but I know it was newly paved. I'll say maybe 3 years. And every time I parked my car, the ground would sweat. It was a stench coming from the ground. And then it was smoke coming from underneath the ground. So with that, let's just say that instead of having a parking lot there, I wanted to put a raised bed garden there. Would that be something that would not be used? Because it seems like there's something under the ground that's bringing up that smell and making the pavement sweat. It was like smoke coming up from it. So would that be something that I wouldn't even get tested if I were to pull up all the tar from that? You understand what I'm saying? Just because it was a stench in the yeah.
That'd be an instance where you would want to, Anna's recommendation to really investigate the history. And if that's the only place where a garden can be, I mean, you'd really want to make sure that was a safe spot. So if underneath the asphalt, and I know they've done this in Deerfield, Mass, where they pulled up all the asphalt and put a community garden in, and we tested, and 2 years of cover crops, and then they finally got the soil in some sort of shape that it was safe, and they planted and are growing food there. So it's not impossible, but it's more challenging to get to the bottom of that, to make sure that you're growing safe food.
Okay, yes, thank you so much.
And Groundwork Somerville has a garden that's behind a junkyard. Not the most probable place for a garden. And it is on asphalt, but they do have raised beds that are made out of stone. But before they even built the raised beds, they didn't break up the asphalt. They laid down some wood chips, quite a bit of wood chips. Then they built the raised bed. So you still have the asphalt, but you have that layer of wood chips, several layers of wood chips, then the raised beds. And I think they still have that site. I found that to be, just after talking with them, that was a good course of action, because they didn't dig up anything. Because sometimes when you dig up one thing, you can release something else. So that was a easier fix for them.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I encourage anyone else to put your question in the chat or unmute yourself. And I just had one other question for Ruben. And just hearing about all of your, the biological test, and how exciting that sounds. And I know very little about that, but just the ability to be able to do, population counts and to the amount of analysis you can do. Is there any, who else is doing that right now, or where, is anyone else doing that?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So right now, there is an organization founded by Dr. Elaine Ingham called the Soil Food Web School. This is an online organization that trains individuals through foundation courses. And then they also offer a microscopy portion to this, along with a consultant as well. Right now, I think that's the only place where you can actually get trained. However, there's a lot of individuals coming out of this school. In fact, we actually have people on our board right now. We also have a member from Connecticut NOFA that's doing this, and also doing some excellent work down in Connecticut, Monique Bosch. And if you guys actually want, there's actually an excellent presentation she had during the winter time, the resilience program. And she explains a lot of the stuff that I just briefly talked about. So there's a lot of good work being done right now. There's a big movement for this, but right now, that's the only place where you can actually get this type of training. And obviously, like I said, there's people that are coming out of the school that are eager to teach some of these things too. And it's happening. A lot of these people are actually coming out of the school and providing similar training to other folks that are interested in this.
That's great. It sounds like be on the cutting edge.
Yes, the soil tech group is learning how to identify the bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and we're pretty excited about all of that. And I can see, our members sending in a soil sample, and Ruben, looking at that soil underneath the microscope, making the slides and looking at it, and then eventually being able to recommend the right compost or the right compost tea that has the additional or missing life that soil needs. That's really, I think, very exciting for us to be able to offer our members to for their soil fertility and to grow healthier food.
We did have a demonstration of that with the youth from the Tapley Garden. We actually took samples from the garden. John Duke, a NOFA board member, came out and worked with us with the microscopes. And it is definitely a very exciting world. So I'm looking forward to Ruben doing that work. They had a lot of fun with looking at the microscope, seeing the life in the microscope. And at the end of it, they drew their representation of what they were seeing. So it was it's a very exciting thing to learn, and we're all looking forward to getting more into that.
What a great thing to be able to do with youth. That's makes it's great. It's a great connection. I did just put a link in the chat for an evaluation. So please do give us feedback, not only on this workshop, but on workshops throughout the conference and the conference overall, what you've liked about it and what we can do to continue to improve. So we always want to get feedback from our participants. So please do take a look at that when you have a chance. We are getting close to the end. If any other questions we can answer, we'd love to do that. Just one other reminder, tomorrow night we have a no-till keynote. So, back into the soil again, we'll go for a focus tomorrow night with some exemplary farmers focused on no-till. So don't miss that. And just want to give a thanks again to each of our presenters for sharing each of what you've been up to, and it's very exciting.
Thank you, and thanks everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
Laura.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Ruben.
Thank
Thanks,
you all.
Jane.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Christine.
Thank
And
you,
Paul.
soil tech scientist.
Actually, I'm going to drop something in the chat.
Do you have Monique's link to that presentation?
Oh, yeah,
That's an excellent presentation.
yeah.
Yeah, that was very good. Whew.
Keep on getting off of mute. She's actually, I put something on the chat. There's actually a lunch that she's having tomorrow that she's
Oh, yeah.
hosting.
Okay.
So if anybody's interested, there's that'll be really good. It's around noontime. So, but I think she does a lot of cool stuff. She'll show images on the microscope, how to apply some of these compost teas and extracts, how she make them. Really good information.
Yeah, I think we need to incorporate that here too, Ruben, to get some bubblers. Get some bubblers up here in Massachusetts.
That
I actually
lunch.
just purchased this today, and I want to look at it under the microscope. I also found that, funny enough, the local hydroponic store that focuses on cannabis has a lot more equipment and any other materials than anywhere else. And so I actually bought some nematodes from them, actually. So I'll be looking at those at the microscope too.
Okay, great, great.
Perhaps even too, get perhaps even a harvest of nematodes. Sometimes if you find them in the soil, you can do what's called a Berley's extraction funnel, and then start to actually get these organisms too. So that way you don't have to purchase equipment. Or any of these organisms too. So a lot of exciting stuff that we can do with this.
Great.
All right. Well,
Thank you and good night, everybody.
All
Thank you
right,
all.
I'll end this
Night.
I'll end the meeting in 1 minute so people can get things out of the chat. But otherwise, thanks again, and we'll see you at the conference the rest of the evenings this week.
thank you all.
Good
Night.
night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.